CNN News.
So we're going to get into our next segment.
Mm.
So we heard the opening statement. The American dream is at the expense of the American Negro. So James Baldwin, as we know, famous writer, civil rights activist, we know him, we love him here, speaks in for it. So he's gonna. So I think we're gonna hear his rebuttal in full. So it's about 20 minutes. But
Okay.
but I want you to take, you guys, just notice what he says, and I think he kind of takes a different take in terms of what I said earlier as far as debating, is that often you build upon proven facts and data in order to build your argument. He doesn't do that, but he's going to do it in a way that I think, ultimately makes sense if you know of him and you know of his and the style of rhetoric that he often uses when he has debates like these.
Yeah.
So,
and he always tries to. The one thing I noticed with Baldwin was he tries to like personalize everything,
Mm-hmm.
which like of course that resonates with people,
Right.
But
I think he does it in a way where, like,
he's trying to get you to see.
It's not crashing overhead with a frying pan with it.
It's like, here, let me paint you a picture. It's like, here's my eyeballs, see through them.
Right. Exactly it. It's, I think, take a look into my worldview for a minute.
Right.
But
and then make your own decisions.
Ahead of us.
Essentially. So
let's get into it, because it's so just sit back, get your popcorn for the next 20 minutes, because it's going to it's not good, but it's going to be not lovely, but it's
Cambridge
I think
fashion
just let what
in 1965 is just like, I can just smell the elbow pad in the room, like you know what I mean? Like leather and tweed, just fucking, just that like college smell, but distilled to the level of fucking like Cambridge, bro. Like, anyway, this was
now a very great pleasure and a very great sense of.
This room is filled with the oppressors of tomorrow. You know what I mean? Like, it's Cambridge. Fucking
honor that I called Mr. James Baldwin to speak third to this motion.
I bet you could. I'm sure the eagle-eyed viewers probably could catch some real fucking doozies in the crowd if they're like watching.
Yeah.
Now we have Mr. James Baldwin, the star of the evening, who has been sitting, listening attentively, and getting a wonderful reception here in the Cambridge Union. Tremendous enthusiasm from all sides of the House for Mr. Baldwin, who has been listening to the arguments. Now will bring the voice of actual experience to the debate.
Good evening. I find myself, not for the first time, in the position of a kind of Jeremiah. For example, I don't disagree with Mr. Burford that the inequality suffered by the American Negro population of the United States has hindered the American dream. Indeed, it has. I quarrel with some other things he has to say. The other, deeper element of a certain awkwardness I feel has to do with one's point of view. I have to put it that way. One's sense, one's system of reality. It would seem to me that the proposition before the House, when I put it that way, is the American dream at the expense of the American Negro, or the American dream is at the expense of the American Negro, is a question hideously loaded, and that one's response to that question, or one's reaction to that question, has to depend on an effect on where you find yourself in the world, what your sense of reality is, what your system of reality is. That is, it depends on assumptions which we hold so deeply as to be scarcely aware of them. A white South African, or a Mississippi sharecropper, or a Mississippi sheriff, or a Frenchman driven out of Algeria, all have, at bottom, a system of reality which compels them to, for example, in the case of the French exile from Algeria, to defend French reasons for having ruled Algeria. The Mississippi or the Alabama sheriff, who really does believe when he's facing a Negro boy or girl, that this woman, this man, this child, must be insane to attack the system to which he owes his entire identity.
Dude, immediately globalizing the fucking, like, immediate international problem. Like,
right.
Of course, for such a person, the proposition of which we're trying to discuss here tonight does not exist. And on the other hand, I have to speak as one of the people who've been most attacked by what we must now here call the Western or the European system of reality. What white people in the world, because the doctrine of white supremacy, I hate to say it here, comes from Europe. That's how it got to America. Beneath then, whatever one's reaction to this proposition is, has to be the question of whether or not civilizations can be considered as such equal, or whether one civilization has the right to overtake and subjugate and in fact to destroy another. Now what happens when that happens? Leaving aside all the physical facts which one can quote, leaving aside rape or murder, leaving aside the bloody catalog of oppression, which we are in one way too familiar with already, what this does to the subjugated, the most private, the most serious thing this does to the subjugated, is to destroy his sense of reality. It destroys, for example, his father's authority over him. His father can no longer tell him anything because the past has disappeared, and his father has no power in the world. This means, in the case of an American Negro, born in that glittering republic, and in the moment you are born, since you don't know any better, every stick and stone and every face is white, and since you have not yet seen a mirror, you suppose that you are too. It comes as a great shock around the age of 5 or 6 or 7 to discover that the flag to which you have pledged allegiance, along with everybody else, has not pledged allegiance to you. It comes as a great shock to discover that Gary Cooper killing off the Indians when you were rooting for Gary Cooper, that the Indians were you.
Right.
It comes as a great shock to discover that the country, which is your birthplace, and to which you owe your life and your identity,
camera goes to the only black guy in the room.
System of reality evolved any place for you. The disaffection, the demoralization.
Yes.
Yeah. As an immigrant, I felt that.
Right.
And ironically, among other black people. Like,
yeah,
the very people who I felt I would feel accepted actually made me feel worse because I looked like them. I may not have had the same cultural aspect as them, but, having a common ancestry. But it wasn't enough for me to feel like home. If anything, it felt like, and I've always felt this way, like an outsider, even within the community that was, adjacent to mine. So, but yeah, he speaks facts here, is that you grew up, and I think this is kind of the danger in terms, I think, of the American dream. It's the idea that you're born and we're kind of propagandized into thinking, I have to serve my country. I have to do this in honor of my country. And yet, this same country that you give allegiance to may not do shit for you unless you have the means to do it yourself. And I think that's the danger. It's this idea of having to give blood, tooth, and nail for the benefit of Lady America, when Lady America is not necessarily serving you. So I think that was very poignant that he said that in that way. Like, and I think, that's not just unique to him. That's every American, I would argue, has, whether they, in my opinion, whether they care to think it or not, psychologically has that idea.
Yeah.
That, we're meant to serve this land that may or may not reciprocate that for you.
Part of it for me, and you'll find this funny, that like I have such hippie parents that I didn't have that problem. Like, they were feeding me Alan Watts's Rat Race, so that, you know what I mean? Like, to where this, they knew after the 80s, the greed is good era, they were like, okay, yeah, that's not good,
Right.
So, but for me, none of, like, my race was part of that, Like, and this is something that, like, you have to deal with, that general white person in America doesn't really have to. Like, their identity is not a factor.
Well, it's funny because I remember I grew up in the UK in the 80s. Like, I never had, and I was a child, but I knew I was Black, but I never knew it as significant or any different compared to anybody else. Yeah, I knew it was different, but I didn't have the idea that my skin color was going to affect a lot of my livelihood until I moved here. And as I said, when I moved here among other Black people, that's when that switch came on. It's like, oh, I am different, and even within my own community. So, so for me, I would argue it happened maybe a little later. But yeah, and I think Sean in the chat said, I remember my friends that were Black or Hispanic telling me about them realizing this. Yeah, it's like something happens to you, and I more often than not, it's usually racial. That it's like, oh, something's wrong. Like, and I think in the grand scheme of things, something's wrong with the system.
Yeah,
that I'm born here, so I shouldn't have to deal with this in this way. But for some reason, I am. And that's when, and I think that's kind of why what's happening now, especially within this Trump administration, is dangerous. Because I think it's the idea of they want to, whether they care to admit it or not, they want to subvert any thoughts you have as far as difference to consume you with white supremacy. That the hope is that you'll just be overburdened by it, that you kind of go into yourself in terms of you're not going to question yourself, you're not going to answer, you're not going to answer back in terms of what people might say or do against you, and have it be because of how melanated you are or may not be. So in part,
and you'll hear Buckley like later in this segment. I don't know if it's this segment or the next one. But
next one.
He kind of touches on this, like, for us to be equals, I have to see you as white, I think is pretty much the line. Right?
Right.
Like,
right.
And like, that's what you're talking about where, and it's, for me.
Yeah. You have
honestly,
to see me. Right.
And shout out to my other non-neurotypicals who also probably have this issue of identity, right? Especially when you look at even worse, like things like BPD, stuff like that, right? Is worse with this, right? But that identity, like, I don't think about it. Like, it is not in my, like, at all. Like, even when you're supposed to. Like, my identity isn't a factor for things.
Mm-hmm.
Like, my brain doesn't find that important information to hold on to. So like our ideas of self are all sorts of weird. And like our egos are weird, all that fun stuff. So I'm sure people in chat will know what I'm talking about. But like compared to our neurotypical peers where image and like how you're perceived is super important, those of us on the spectrum, depending on how worse we have it with that, are like, yeah, that's not a thing,
Right.
So other than people pleasing and knowing that like if people don't like you, it's bad, like we that's why I tried everything's diffused with humor, that's my coping mechanisms, anyway. But yeah, we'll hear Buckley kind of go on that tangent. That's still happening now, right? Of like,
right.
We don't talk about the difference. Like,
just be white.
Equalize, right? Equalize.
Just be white, or just think of yourself as white, and you'll be fine.
Yeah.
Which, ironically, they never will, because they always will see you as other.
Right.
So, so yeah, a lot of people kind of talk of both sides of their mouth and thoughts with that. But anyway, let's get back into Uncle James.
You suppose that you are too. It comes as a great shock around the age of 5 or 6 or 7 to discover that the flag to which you have pledged allegiance, along with everybody else, has not pledged allegiance to you. It comes as a great shock to discover that Gary Cooper killing off the Indians when you were rooting for Gary Cooper, that the Indians were you. It comes as a great shock to discover that the country, which is your birthplace, and to which you owe your life and your identity, has not in its whole system of reality evolved any place for you. The disaffection, the demoralization, and the gap between one person and another, only on the basis of the color of their skins, begins there and accelerates throughout a whole lifetime. So that presently you realize you're 30 and are having a terrible time managing to trust your countrymen.
Mm-hmm.
By the time you are 30, you have been through a certain kind of mill. And the most serious effect of the mill you've been through is, again, not the catalog of disaster. The policemen, the taxi drivers, the waiters, the landlady, the landlord, the banks, the insurance companies, the millions of details, 24 hours of every day, which spell out to you that you are a worthless human being. It is not that. It is by that time you've begun to see it happening in your daughter or your son or your niece or your nephew. You are 30 by now, and nothing you have done has helped you to escape the trap. But what is worse than that is that nothing you have done, and as far as you can tell, nothing you can do, will save your son or your daughter from meeting the same disaster and not impossibly coming to the same end. Now, we're speaking about expense. I suppose there are several ways to address oneself to some attempt to define what that word means here. Let me put it this way, that from a very literal point of view, the harbors and the ports and the railroads of the country, the economy, especially of the southern states, could not conceivably be what it has become if they had not had, and do not still have indeed, and for so long, so many generations, cheap labor. I am stating very seriously, and this is not an overstatement, that I picked the cotton, and I carried it to market, and I built the railroads under someone else's whip for nothing. For nothing. The Southern oligarchy, which has until today so much power in Washington, and therefore some power in the world, was created by my labor and my sweat, and the violation of my women and the murder of my children. This, in the land of the free and the home of the brave. And no one can challenge that statement. It is a matter of historical record. In another way, this dream, and we'll get to the dream in a moment, is at the expense of the American Negro. You watch this in the Deep South in great relief, but not only in the Deep South. In the Deep South, you are dealing with a sheriff or a landlord or a landlady or the girl at the Western Union desk. And she doesn't know quite who she's dealing with, by which I mean that if you're not part of the town, and if you are a northern nigger, it shows in millions of ways. So she simply knows that it's an unknown quantity, and she wants to have nothing to do with it. So she won't talk to you. You have to wait for a while to get your telegram. Okay, we all know this. We've been through it. And by the time you get to be a man, it's very easy to deal with. But what is happening in the poor woman, the poor man's mind, is this. They've been raised to believe, and by now they helplessly believe, that no matter how terrible their lives may be, and their lives have been quite terrible, and no matter how far they fall, no matter what disaster overtakes them, they have one enormous knowledge and consolation, which is like a heavenly revelation. At least they are not black. Now I suggest that of all the terrible things that can happen to a human being, that is one of the worst. I suggest that what has happened to white Southerners is in some ways, after all, much worse than what has happened to Negroes there. Because Sheriff Clark in Selma, Alabama, cannot be considered, no one can be dismissed as a total monster. I'm sure he loves his wife, his children. I'm sure that, he likes to get drunk. He's, after all, one's got to assume, and he is visibly a man like me. But he doesn't know what drives him to use the club, to menace with the gun, and to use the cattle prod. Something awful must have happened to a human being to be able to put a cattle prod against a woman's breast, for example. What happens to the woman is ghastly. What happens to the man who does it is in some ways much, much worse. This is being done, after all, not 100 years ago, but in 1965, in a country which is blessed with what we call prosperity, a word we won't examine too closely, with a certain kind of social coherence, which calls itself a civilized nation and which espouses the notion of the freedom of the world.
Israel. Oh, sorry. We mean the other one.
And it is perfectly true from the point of view now simply of an American Negro. Any American Negro watching this, no matter where he is, from the vantage point of Harlem, which is another terrible place, has to say to himself, in spite of what the government says we can't do anything about it. But those are white people being murdered in Mississippi work farms, being carried off to jail. Those are white children running up and down the streets. The government would find some way of doing something about it. We have a civil rights bill now. We had an amendment, the 15th Amendment, nearly 100 years ago. I hate to sound again like an Old Testament prophet, but if the amendment was not honored then, I don't have any reason for believing the civil rights bill will be honored now. And after all, one's been there since before, a lot of other people got there. If one has got to prove one's title to the land, isn't 400 years enough? 400 years, at least 3 wars. The American soil is full of the corpses of my ancestors. Why is my freedom or my citizenship or my right to live there, how is it conceivably a question now? And I suggest further that in the same way, the moral life of Alabama sheriffs and poor Alabama ladies, white ladies, their moral lives have been destroyed by the plague called color, that the American sense of reality has been corrupted by it. At the risk of sounding excessive, what I always felt when I finally left the country, found myself abroad in other places, and watched Americans abroad. And these are my countrymen, and I do care about them. And even if I didn't, there is something between us. We have the same shorthand. I know, when I look at a girl or a boy from Tennessee, where they came from in Tennessee, and what that means. No Englishman knows that, no Frenchman, no one in the world knows that, except another black man who comes from the same place. But one watches these lonely people, denying the only kin they have. We talk about integration in America as though it was some great new conundrum. The problem in America is that we've been integrated for a very long time. Put me next to any African, and you will see what I mean. And my grandmother was not a rapist. What we are not facing is the results of what we've done. What one begs the American people to do for all our sakes is simply to accept our history. I was there not only as a slave, but also as a concubine. One knows the power, after all, which can be used against another person if you've got absolute power over that person. It seemed to me when I watched Americans in Europe that what they didn't know about Europeans was what they didn't know about me. They weren't trying, for example, to be nasty to the French girl or rude to the French waiter. They didn't know they hurt their feelings. They didn't have any sense that this particular woman, this particular man, though they spoke another language and had different manners and ways, was a human being. And they walked over them with the same kind of bland ignorance, condescension, charming and cheerful, with which they'd always patted me on the head and called me shine, and were upset when I was upset. What is relevant about this is that whereas 40 years ago when I was born, the question of having to deal with what is unspoken by the subjugated, what is never said to the master, of ever having to deal with this reality was a very remote possibility. It was in no one's mind. When I was growing up, I was taught in American history books that Africa had no history, and neither did I. That I was a savage, about whom the less said the better, who had been saved by Europe and brought to America. And of course, I believed it. I didn't have much choice. Those are the only books there were. Everyone else seemed to agree. If you walk out of Harlem, ride out of Harlem, downtown, the world agrees. What you see is much bigger, cleaner, whiter, richer, safer than where you are. They collect the garbage. People obviously can pay their life insurance. The children look happy, safe. You're not. And you go back home. And it would seem then, of course, that it's an act of God, that this is true, that you belong where white people have put you. It is only since the Second World War that there's been a counter-image in the world. And that image not come about through any legislation on the part of any American government, but through the fact that Africa was suddenly on the stage of the world, and the Africans had to be dealt with in a way that had never been dealt with before. This gave an American Negro for the first time a sense of himself beyond a savage or a clown. It has created, and will create, a great many conundrums. One of the great things that the white world does not know, but I think I do know, is that black people are just like everybody else. One has used the myth of Negro and the myth of color to pretend and to assume that you are dealing essentially with something exotic, bizarre, and practically, according to human laws, unknown. Alas, that is not true. We are also mercenaries, dictators, murderers, liars. We are human too. What is crucial here is that unless we can manage to establish some kind of dialogue between those people whom I pretend have paid for the American dream and those other people who have not achieved it, we will be in terrible trouble. I want to say at the end, at the last, is that is what concerns me most. We are sitting in this room, and we are all, at least we like to think we are, relatively civilized, and we can talk to each other at least on certain levels, so that we could walk out of here assuming that the measure of our enlightenment, or at least our politeness, has some effect on the world. It may not. I remember, for example, when the ex-Attorney General, Mr. Robert Kennedy, said that it was conceivable that in 40 years in America we might have a Negro president. And that sounded like a very emancipated statement, I suppose, to white people. They were not in Harlem when this statement was first heard, and did not hear, and possibly will never hear, the laughter and the bitterness and the scorn with which the statement was greeted. From the point of view of the man in the Harlem barbershop, Bobby Kennedy only got here yesterday. And now he's already on his way to the presidency. We've been here for 400 years, and now he tells us that maybe in 40 years, if you're good, we may let you become president.
Dude, it was the brainworms.
What is dangerous here
on old
is the
Bobby
turning
Kennedy.
Away from.
That was what happened.
The turning away from anything any white American says. The reason for the political hesitation and in spite of the Johnson landslide is the one who's been betrayed by American politicians for so long. And I am a grown man, and perhaps I can be reasoned with. I certainly hope I can be. But I don't know, and neither does Martin Luther King. None of us know how to deal with those other people whom the white world has so long ignored, who don't believe anything the white world says, and don't entirely believe anything I or Martin say. And one can't blame them. You watch what has happened to them in less than 20 years. It seems to me that the city of New York, for example, this is my last point, which has had Negroes in it for a very long time. If the city of New York were able, as it has indeed been able, in the last 15 years to reconstruct itself, tear down buildings and raise great new ones, downtown and for money, and has done nothing whatever except build housing projects in the ghetto for the Negroes. And of course, the Negroes hate it. Presently, the property does indeed deteriorate because the children cannot bear it. They want to get out of the ghetto. If the American pretensions were based on more solid, a more honest assessment of life and of themselves, it would not mean for Negroes, when someone says urban renewal, that Negroes simply are going to be thrown out into the streets, which is what it does mean now. This is not an act of God. We're dealing with a society made and ruled by men. If the American Negro had not been present in America, I am convinced that the history of the American labor movement would be much more edifying than it is. It is a terrible thing for an entire people to surrender to the notion that 1/9 of its population is beneath them. And until that moment, until the moment comes when we, the Americans, we, the American people, are able to accept the fact that I have to accept, for example, that my ancestors are both white and black, that on that continent we are trying to forge a new identity for which we need each other, and that I am not a ward of America. I am not an object of missionary charity. I am one of the people who built the country. Until this moment, there is scarcely any hope for the American dream, because the people who are denied participation in it, by their very presence, will wreck it. And if that happens, it's a very grave moment for the West. Thank you.
Thoughts? There's so many.
There's a lot.
Yeah.
I will start with this, though. It's, as you said earlier, and I think this is the best way to sum up, I think, his statements. Which, again, I think especially in light of recent events, is why this country is the way that it is. We choose, again, it's the idea of enlightenment, which is kind of the basis of this country, right? Like, I think, therefore I am type thing. And it's not a wrong idea.
By Descartes.
It can but it will cause us to kind of be blind to the reality of others.
Yeah.
Or we can choose to ignore it. And for someone like Charlie Kirk, that was his problem. Like, you can tell someone like that, this is the reality. I think that was the jarring thing for someone like him, is the idea that the reality of someone like me, may not match his reality. And that was very jarring to him and people like him. And so he would do whatever he can to kind of be like, no, that's not true. That's not the case. Or it shouldn't be that way or whatever else. But like, you know, but it's, again, the idea of, we have to try and hide the alternate realities that exist in this country in order to fulfill like this reality, which will not include people like us.
Yeah.
And I think that was the main thing that James Baldwin was getting at. It's the idea of, we fail to look at each other's perspectives.
Which
like he was talking about.
I had two notes on that. With I liked how he mentioned unions in a way that were like, obviously the union effort needs to like progress, right? Like that's, you know, And like he assumed everyone would think the same way about it in that room in Cambridge in 1965. Like that because all the union efforts, both in Britain and whatever, were that had gotten goods for people were like not that long ago, you know, like especially in Britain, you know, that's when like the trains unionized, right? Like and privatized, you know.
Yeah.
So, but so he automatically assumed that. But the other thing I found funny was he is international black man of mystery, as we like to portray on this show. We have one right here, right? International black man of mystery, and he spoke. It's like this whole ADOS movement. Like he's both.
Yes.
Like, and like that's the thing. Like, yes, there's gonna be things that you may not understand because you're both, but you more than anyone else understands what they're going through.
Right.
And like your perspective is like ignored. Because you know what a French guy under occupation
looks
you know,
like.
right. And like the old money.
Or let's bring it even to current day.
Mm-hmm.
You understand what a Palestinian is going through.
Right. You've internationalized this struggle.
Right. And this is why, and I loved how, thank you for reminding me of this. I loved how he kind of brought it back to Africa in terms of, look, and this was during the time when a lot of these countries were beginning to.
Yes, he mentioned like, they might be big dogs on campus now. You might have to fucking listen up.
Right. But this was at the time when a lot of these African nations were beginning to claim independence.
Right.
From Europe.
But
so
I like how he brought
kind of seeing this.
How he understood like the African American understanding more than anyone else. He also understood the American understanding more than it because he experienced that too, and like his kinship between white Southerners. You know, it's like, no, I also understand what you go through because I'm here with you. We're in these cities with you, like, you know.
But I think. But to be fair to him, because I believe he grew up in the South for part of his life.
Yes.
So
pretty sure.
You know, so having that understanding, but also traveling outside of the States to kind of see the perception of how America is in
and that's
terms
only
of
gotten
in the
worse.
Eyes of others.
Only gotten worse. Like
I can't tell you how. And I keep saying this, like I was in London a couple of months ago. I can't tell you how horrified, just as shit as the UK is, there are certain systems in place that are generally guaranteed, like healthcare. The fact that, and like, I had people straight up ask me, how in the hell can you live in a country that doesn't offer its citizens healthcare? Guaranteed healthcare. Like, how is that possible? But I think
we're
he
funding
called out
Israel's fucking healthcare right now. Like,
right.
So,
but
we can't do it for our own people.
Right. But I think ultimately he called out why the American dream cannot be a full reality, at least right now, is because it's in the standardization of whiteness. And essentially, in order for you to be a part of the American dream, you almost have to give up your identity in terms of who you are. Like, it's basically like, for me, basically like, oh, if you go to this high school or you go to this college,
become a cog
if you get
in the
this
machine.
job, if you do all these things, then we'll look at you a little bit better than if you're in the hood,
the cheese,
chasing dope or whatever.
Right.
And that's the hope. That's the hope that I was brought into. It's like, if I do these certain things to appease Whitey, then I will be okay. And I did everything essentially
fucking dope is coming from. Oliver North bringing it in on military planes to the Sandinistas.
Right.
Like,
and for all intents and purposes, I've done what is expected of me to do. And I'm still, And it's like, so obviously that's a bull-faced lie. So, because you're still going to look at me as less than. And I think it was Chris Rock who said, I'm going to paraphrase what he said, but I think he said something towards the lines of, if you wouldn't be like me, a black man, and I'm rich. That's how good being white is in America. Like, you'll rather be a poor white man than a rich black man. So that's kind of the standard that, ironically enough, it's white supremacy has given us this system that they try to now downplay or whatever. But you are the ones who created it. Mm-hmm. So now we're calling you out on it. You don't like that. So, I think there was a lot there. But, and in a way, I almost don't understand why this isn't played more.
Sure.
Like, this should be featured in every school. Like, his rebuttal should be talked about. Honestly, this is just my personal opinion. Like, I have a dream speech can take a backseat to this.
Yeah.
Because, as you said, he brought in, what makes it a little more poignant is he brought in the globalization aspect. He brought in terms of the way African Americans view themselves is equivalent to these other oppressed groups in the world that have been hampered by white supremacy. And so we have a shared oppression that needs to be dealt with. So I really like that he kind of brought it to the human element instead of the American element that I think we get so caught up in, because we often think our problems are so unique that no one can understand it. Like, especially more so if you're oppressed. But no, it's like an African man can understand where you're coming from if you have the heart and the courage to listen to them and hear their perspective on things. And for me, traveling around the world, and I've been in many regions, not all, but many regions that kind of have the understanding of the issues of people are really just really all the same. Ultimately, it's really all the same. People have the same. Yeah, it's all the same shit. All people just care about, I just want to make enough money to take care of myself, take care of my kids. And I have to try and figure that out in the context of the culture, of the environment, of the country that I'm living in. Like,
rent, it's too damn high.
Or something towards those lines, sure. But that's a way you can phrase it. But
yeah.
As a karate expert, I will not talk about anyone up here.
Yeah.
That was also a debate.
Honestly, right. I think honestly, again, I'm surprised that this debate is not discussed more.
Sure.
Just in the general lexicon of American. I mean, it's the idea like we revere the "I Have a Dream" speech so much. This should be up there too, because I think really James Baldwin, and this is the thing that I was saying earlier, because he kind of went off script of what you do in a debate. Like, you don't do what he just did. This felt more like a sermon, if anything else.
Yeah.
Like, he humanized it, but he kind of personalized it
It's
in a
called
way.
rhetoric. Works well.
Right. But he did it in a way that you can't refute anything that he said. That, I think, is the genius of it, is that nothing of what he said can be necessarily
it's very Iron Man tactic, right? Where it's like,
yeah,
Steel Man, sorry. Where it's, you create an argument that your opponent will accept. Right.
But he didn't necessarily give 50% of like like in order to kind of prove your point.
No, goes,
which again, that's why, right. That's the genius of what he did. So he's especially gifted at doing that.
This is how it is. Do you agree? Let's figure that out. Where do we let's get there,
Right.
Like,
and if you don't understand it, I'm going to tell you why.
Right.
So like he gets there. But yeah, he does it in a way masterfully that almost like a good preacher,
Yeah.
Like in the sense of you bring it to the human level. And that's one of the things, especially doing advocacy work, that they tell you is you always kind of have to balance like the facts and the figures with personal experience, because at the end of the day, they can say that's facts wrong or you misconstrued it, but they can never discount your actual experience.
Yeah.
Because you lived it. They can't take, so even though they may not agree with you in terms of the statistics or the facts or whatever, they will come to you probably at the end of the day and say, look, I may disagree with you, but I totally might hear you in terms of your personal experience. And they might feel empathy, the word that according to a person doesn't exist, like in terms of your experience, which I think that's what he did so masterfully, but basically for the whole thing, that as you saw, he got a standing O, which I believe, according to what I read, that didn't happen in these things. Like it didn't, people didn't necessarily read, but I think he came in kind of hot anyway, because he was kind of the star of the show.
Right.
You can clap for that.
But the fact that he got a standing O in a predominantly white room in another country really says something, especially given that time. But yeah, masterful, like masterclass in how you debate. Wish we did it more like that here, but talking about stuff like these is why we're demonetized. So if you want us to, we definitely should do these more, like more of these React shows. But if you'd like us to do more, let us know in the comments. Like, what else should we react to in this long form format? So in order for us to do shows like these, we need your support financially. So if you want to help us, you can scan the QR code that you see on your screen, or you can go to the Ko-fi link that you see at the bottom of your screen if you have any monies that you would like to give to us. If you're in the YouTube chat right now, live, you can type in ! donate, all one word, to donate through the Ko-fi link. You can also donate through Cash App, PayPal, or Substack. The links are in the description below if you prefer to give in those links there. And as we keep saying, you're not entitled to give. We do this out of love. But if you want to help us, the free way is by liking, subbing, and sharing our content. What about James Baldwin's statements regarding the opening statement? What did anything resonate with you? Do you relate? And again, we loved how he didn't speak just to the African American experience. He spoke to the human experience, especially for the oppressed. So how do you see what he said, going on now? I feel like, again, this could have been done yesterday and it still resonates.
Yeah.
So let us know, what you think of James Baldwin's statements. And we appreciate you guys for watching.
Yeah.